The Cyclops, a strong humanoid monster that smashes buildings with its massive club and tears apart humans for a snack. Known by its iconic one eye, the Cyclops is a relevant reference to many different cultures for thousands of years. But why the one eye? Were they always seen as savage brutes? Who was the most famous Cyclops? Hi everybody, I am Brett, and this is the Fantasy Historian, a channel that uncovers the history behind our favorite fantasy elements and creatures across different media. I like to start off by looking at the 5th edition Monster Manual as a foundation, as it makes for a great summary of common traits and tropes found in fantasy, and is actually one of the best bestiaries out there. Starting at the defining features. When you think of a Cyclops, what do you picture? Looking at the picture in the manual, a Cyclops is a giant human figure, dressed in simple hide clothing. The iconic large one eye is above the nose, and in its hand is that massive classic club to bonk you on the head with. Taking a glance at the monster sheet, and I will skip going over specific stats in favor of abilities, but I will mention that it has a challenge rating of 6 out of 30. It is part of the giant race and has a chaotic neutral temperament, meaning probably shouldn't provoke them. It has a poor depth perception due to its one eye, and it has a multi-attack with its great club, and a great club attack that has a reach of 10 feet, and it can throw rocks if that isn't enough. Taking a look at the lore given here, Cyclops. Cyclopes are one-eyed giants that eke out a meager existence in wildlands. Isolationists by nature, they avoid contact with other races and try to drive away strangers in their territory. Non-religious. Legends claim that the Cyclopes are the spawn of one of the gods of the giants, but these creatures pay little heed to any deities. They see little benefit in prayer and dislike ritual, which they perceive as complex and foreign. However, a Cyclops that gains direct benefit from some site of divine power, or which is threatened by a supernatural force or creature, will pay homage as long as the benefit or threat remains. Unsophisticated. Though they are reasonably intelligent, Cyclopes live simple, reclusive lives, keeping herds of animals for food. They prefer to dwell alone or in small family groups, lairing in caves, ruins, or rough structures of dry stone construction they build themselves. A Cyclops keeps its herd animals with it at night, sealing the entrance to its home with boulders to let it serve double duty as a barn. Although Cyclopes understand the giant tongue, they write nothing and speak little, using grunts and gestures for their interactions with each other. Cyclopes don't use money for trade, but they value gold, shells, and other glittering and colorful objects as jewelry. A Cyclops might wear a necklace strung with feathers and silver coins, but also with pewter goblets, cutlery, and other bits of ruined metal. Unwise. Cyclopes aren't great thinkers or strategists. Slow to learn and bound to their traditional ways, they find innovation difficult. Although they are a terrifying threat in combat due to their size and strength, they can often be tricked by clever foes. Cyclopes can be cowed and awed by obvious displays of magic. Rustics with little exposure to magic, they can be deceived into mistaking a warlock, cleric, or other caster for a powerful divine figure. However, their sense of pride causes them to react with vengeful and bloodthirsty violence once they learn that the individual they assumed was a god is a mere mortal. What I love about the Cyclops here is the amount of references made to its origins in Greek and Roman mythology. It's time to learn why non-religious, unsophisticated, and unwise are all mentioned here. It's time to look at the history of the Cyclops. First, we should start off with the etymology. The word Cyclops means circular or round-eyed in Greek. The plural form of the word is one of those weird ones we find in English. How do you write the plural form of something that ends in an S? The plural form of Cyclops is Cyclopes. Since Cyclops refers to the singular round eye, the word can be used for all sorts of different looking creatures. But the one we might most be familiar with comes from Greek mythology in either Hesiod's Theogony or Homer's Odyssey. Both were written around the same time, somewhere between the 8th and 7th centuries BC. In Hesiod's Theogony, the birth of the universe is explained. It is here that we find the origin of the Cyclopes. Uranos, the sky, and Gaia, the earth, gave birth to the 12 titans, Cyclopes, and the Hecatoncres, or 100-handed ones. Hesiod writes, "Then she bore the Cyclopes, who have very violent hearts, Brontes, thunder, and Steropes, lightning, and strong-spirited Arges, bright. Those who gave thunder to Zeus and fashioned the thunderbolt. These were like the gods in other regards, but only one eye was set in the middle of their foreheads, and they were called Cyclopes, circle-eyed by name, since a single circle-shaped eye was set in their foreheads. Strength and force and contrivances were in their works. Uranos feared and hated the Cyclopes and their brothers, the Hecatoncres, and imprisoned them in Tartarus. Zeus later asked the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncres to help him fight against the Titans. Upon their acceptance, Zeus frees his uncles, and the 3 Cyclopes craft Zeus's thunderbolt. The idea of Cyclopes being blacksmiths is further mentioned in Pseudo-Apollodorus' retelling of the story in the Bibliotheca in the 1st or 2nd century AD. In this story, after Cronos castrated his father, he freed his brothers the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncres, only to imprison them again in Tartarus and put in Campi as their guardian. Once again, Zeus asks for their help and slays Campi. In addition to crafting Zeus's thunderbolt, the Cyclopes also create Poseidon's trident and Hades' helmet of invisibility, which helped them win the war against the Titans, otherwise known as the Titanomachy. The Cyclopes' role as divine blacksmiths are often overshadowed by Hephaestus, who takes the role when he is cast from Mount Olympus. 3rd century AD, Greek poet Callimachus mentions the Cyclopes as Hephaestus' assistants, well that's a tongue twister, and adds Artemis and Apollo's bow, arrow, and quiver to the works. Ever hear of the blind Cyclope brothers? Neither have I. The blind Cyclops comes from perhaps the more famous account of Homer and the Odyssey. King Odysseus of Ithaca is on his journey home after the Trojan War and comes across the land of the Cyclopes. Odysseus describes the Cyclopes as this: an overweening and lawless folk, who, trusting in the immortal gods, plant nothing with their hands nor plow. But all these things spring up for them without sowing or plowing, wheat and barley and vines, which bear the rich clusters of wine, and the reign of Zeus gives them increase. Neither assemblies for council have they, nor appointed laws, but they dwell on the peaks of lofty mountains in hollow caves, and each one is lawgiver to his children and his wives, and they reck nothing one of another. In Homer's Odyssey, Cyclopes are not blacksmiths, but lumbering giant shepherds living in caves. Odysseus, seeing a cave apart from the rest, took 12 of his best men and entered the cave where the solitary Cyclops, Polyphemus, lived. Inside, the men found an abundance of cheese and sheep. The men wanted to grab the cheese and be off, but Odysseus, out of curiosity, wanted to meet the Cyclops. This would prove to be a terrible mistake. While the men were eating, Polyphemus came home from shepherding and rolled a great stone across the entrance of the cave. Frightened, Odysseus and his men hid, but Polyphemus spotted them when he built a fire to cook his meal. Odysseus tried to talk with Polyphemus, only to have Polyphemus snatch 2 of his men and slam them against the ground. Then, before their very eyes, Polyphemus eats them limb by limb. Ugh. Seething with fury, Odysseus thinks about slaying Polyphemus while he sleeps, but realizes they can't get past that great rock rolled across the entrance. So he and his men devise a plan and wait for an opportunity. The next morning, Polyphemus eats another 2 men and then leaves the cave to go about his daily shepherding, rolling the stone back in place behind him. Odysseus and his men find Polyphemus's club and sharpen it into a stake. Finished with the task, they hide the stake and wait for Polyphemus to return. When Polyphemus returns, he grabs 2 more men and sits down for dinner. Odysseus grabs the flask of wine he and his men brought from the ship and offers it to Polyphemus. Upon tasting the wine for the first time, Polyphemus asks for Odysseus' name, and in return, Polyphemus would give him a gift. Odysseus continues to refill Polyphemus' drink until he is drunk, and answers the question by saying, "My name is no man." In response, Polyphemus says his gift is that he will eat him last, and falls asleep in a drunken stupor. Odysseus and his surviving men grab the stake, put the tip into the fire until it is red hot, and thrust it into the eye of Polyphemus, causing him to go blind. Roaring in agony, Polyphemus blindly tries to find Odysseus and his men, but they had hidden themselves under the bellies of the great fluffy sheep of Polyphemus' flock. Enraged, Polyphemus calls upon his fellow Cyclopes, and when they ask him what has happened, he replies, "No man is hurting me." Tricked by Odysseus, Polyphemus receives no help from the other Cyclopes and goes to sleep. The next day, Odysseus and his men escape, clinging to the bottom of the flock as Polyphemus herds them outside. Finally free, Odysseus and his men flee back to the ship. Odysseus decides taunting an already angry Cyclops is a great idea, and proceeds to hurl insults at Polyphemus while he hurls back boulders at the ships. Not done with his prideful boast, Odysseus reveals his true name to Polyphemus, and Polyphemus prays to his father Poseidon to curse Odysseus' journey home. While Polyphemus is never specifically mentioned as having only one eye, the fact that a stabbing to his eye caused him to go blind is a pretty fair assessment. However, that does not stop artists through the ages of depicting Polyphemus with 3 eyes. The Cyclopes that are from Hesiod's Theogony are called Uranian Cyclopes, in reference to their father, while Cyclopes from Homer's Odyssey are called Sicilian or Homeric Cyclopes. Uranian Cyclopes are the sons of Uranos and Gaia and are blacksmiths, while Sicilian or Homeric Cyclopes are uncivilized and barbaric shepherds, sons of Poseidon and Theusa. The last work that makes up the foundation for all future Cyclopes variations is found between the years 406 and 388 BC. Oh boy, this is a tough one. Philoxenus of Cythera was a court poet for the tyrant of Syracuse, Dionysius I. Either from a frank criticism of his ruler's poetry, or in trying to seduce Dionysius' mistress, a female aulos player named Galatea, Philoxenus was thrown into prison. From prison, he wrote the poem Cyclops. In it, Homer's Polyphemus is portrayed as a lovesick fool begging for the love of the sea nymph Galatea. Galatea instead laughs at his clumsy singing and playing. Being a satirical poem performed in song and dance called a dithyramb. It is thought that the poem was making fun of Dionysius I, as portrayed by Polyphemus, and the female aulos player, Galatea, portrayed as the sea nymph Galatea. This story is later picked up by Hellenistic poets, which is from 323 to 31 BC. Theocritus' Idylls retells the story where Polyphemus uses the panpipe to create music to heal his broken heart. Later, Ovid introduces Acis, a young shepherd that catches Galatea's eye, in his poem Metamorphosis. Polyphemus catches Acis and Galatea, enjoying each other's company. And enraged by jealousy, Polyphemus squashes Acis with a boulder.
That's gotta hurt! It's gotta hurt!
Galatea, in her sorrow and with the help of the gods, turn Acis into the river Acis, making him a river god. In another retelling, Polyphemus wins her heart with his music. They give birth to the forefathers of the Celts, the Illyrians and the Gauls. From these 3 main works, Hesiod's Theogony, Homer's Odyssey, and Philoxenus' Cyclops, many other tellings of the tale are formed. Let me know in the comments which one you have heard the most, or which one you like the most. I would be remiss if I did not mention the Roman, quote-unquote, sequel of the story. The Roman poet Virgil writes in his epic poem, the Aeneid, of how the hero Aeneas runs away from a blind Polyphemus. In Book 3 of Virgil's Aeneid, Aeneas and the Trojans land upon the island of the Cyclopes and meet Achaemenids, who was left behind by Ulysses, Odysseus, and his men on the island inhabited by the Cyclopes. I can just imagine this poor guy looking on in dismay as his companions flee away safely. All the while his king is taunting Polyphemus. But what about me?
They left without me. They do this every year.
I keep forgetting how to say this name. Achaemenids tells Aeneas about the giant Polyphemus, who he escaped by hiding after Ulysses blinded him. Aeneas and his men take him aboard and flee the island, pursued by the Cyclopes. Aeneas offers to return him to the Greeks, but Achaemenid refuses, saying he would rather be with Aeneas. I wonder why. It is said that the stones of Isole Ferrolioni are the boulders thrown by Polyphemus. Along with being thought of as blacksmiths or lumbering shepherds, Cyclopes are also thought to be builders. Aristotle and Pliny both make mention of a belief of the ancient Greeks that the walls of Mycenae in Tiryns were built by Cyclopes. The large uncut stones used to make up the wall seemed an impossible feat for a normal human. Pausanias writes in his book Description of Greece, the 1st century AD, there still remain, however, parts of the city wall of Mycenae, including the gate upon which stand lions. These, too, are said to be the work of the Cyclopes, who made for Proetus the wall at Tiryns. Going on from here and turning to the right, you come to the ruins of Tiryns. The wall, which is the only part of the ruins still remaining, is a work of the Cyclopes made of unwrought stones, each stone being so big that a pair of mules could not have moved the smallest from its place to the slightest degree. Long ago, small stones were so inserted that each of them binds the large blocks firmly together. The monster manual leans heavily into Homer's Odyssey, without much reference to any other sources. The great club, the traits, the rock throw, they all relate to Odysseus and Polyphemus. With the history now firmly in our mind, we can finish drawing a complete picture of the Cyclops. Let's flesh out the depiction, taking information from the Forgotten Realms. On average, Cyclopes stand around 12 to 15 feet, or 3.7 meters tall, and weighs 1,200 pounds, or 540 kilograms. That is as tall as an elephant and as heavy as a bison. Cyclopes have light tan to dark brown skin, a black or brown colored eye, and dark hair. Some can also have a spike on their head, which I believe is a reference to the 1958 movie The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. I could be wrong. Cyclopes live in warm, temperate climates with mountains and hills. This is taken from the climate and geography of the Mediterranean. From Homer, we can also add that Cyclopes are omnivores, eating cheese as well as meat and drinking milk. They like to live away from other creatures unless they are domesticated. From history, we can also add 2 different species, Uranian, Hesiodic, and Sicilian, Homeric. They can be incredible blacksmiths, shepherds, musicians, or city builders. I want to end off the video with some ideas of how to incorporate the Cyclops into our own stories or homebrews. With such a strong Greek and Roman history, it could be fun to have them in any setting that has a theme of ancient Greece or Rome, perhaps as a boss monster like Polyphemus. They would also make excellent blacksmiths of magical artifacts. Players could go to Mount Etna to have a Cyclops forge a magical piece of equipment, or ask about one that is being used in the wrong hands. Perhaps they are merchants, selling magical items to any adventurer able to pay the price. They could also be shepherds or beastmasters to other mythical beasts. Perhaps they are trying to protect them from extinction and will fiercely defend any who try to hunt them. For more ideas, Cyclopes are also mentioned in other cultures, such as the one-eyed Balor from Irish mythology. Balor is described as being the leader of the Fomorians, which are monstrous supernatural beings in Irish mythology. He is a giant that could shoot magical laser beams of destruction out of his singular eye. The name Balor might be from the common Celtic word Baloros, meaning the flashing one. His grandson, Lugh, slays him with a spear or sling, depending on the version. And there we have it, the history, the biology, and the ecology of the mighty Cyclops, the first entry into our bestiary. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you want to learn more about the history, biology, and ecology behind our favorite creatures in the fantasy genre. I'll see you all in the next one.